Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the JCC of the East Bay, and thank you all for coming out tonight. Now I have the honor of introducing our speakers for tonight. Dr. Devra Davis founded the Environmental Health Trust in 2007 in Teton County, Wyoming, to provide basic research and education about environmental health hazards locally, nationally, and internationally. Dr. Davis is currently a visiting lecturer at Georgetown, Harvard, and other universities. She was also the founding director of the Board of Environmental Studies and Toxicology of the U.S. National Research Council, National Academy of Sciences, and Scholar in Residence from 1983 to 1997. Her new book, Disconnect, which is available over on the tables tonight, provides a shocking detail about cell phone radiation and your health. Right now, it's the #1 bestseller in science on Amazon.com. So please support the cause by purchasing a book tonight. Dr. Davis was also part of the team that won the Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore for work on global warming in 2007. She has a distinguished scientific career spanning 30 years. We are honored to have her here tonight from Washington, D.C. Now I will pass it off to Dr. Devra Davis.
Well, thank you, Sam, and thank you very much for coming out this evening. I know it's tough to compete with the giants. I'm not sure we really can do that, but and we wish them well, of course. But I'm very happy to see all of you this evening. I'm especially happy to see my daughter and son-in-law-to-be who are with us this evening. So thank you for coming down. I'm going to talk with you tonight about what we know about cancer and what we can do about cell phone radiation to protect ourselves. I really want to say it's an honor for me to work with Lloyd and Ellie. They've been fabulous, and you'll see some footage of them in action. They don't just talk the talk, they walk the talk, as you will see in a moment. The book is available now, although it's hard to find it in Berkeley bookstores, which is why we've schlepped them here for you. I think that I was trying to think of a modern midrash to explain why cell phone radiation really is a Jewish issue, and I think it relates to tikkun olam. Tikkun olam, as some of you may know, means first to do no harm, but also to heal the world. And you are obligated to try to make the world a better place. It's a commandment in a sense. It's a mitzvah. And I think knowing what I have learned about cell phones, I really feel at this point I have no choice but to speak out as I have to try to warn people that there are simple things you can do to protect yourselves. Cell phones really are small two-way microwave radios. Most people don't know that. They, in fact, have never been tested for safety, ever. In fact, recently, the cellular communications industry has said, well, we never told you they're safe. They just meet the standards that have been laid down by others. In addition, we know microwave radiation can be damaging and that we assume it's harmless. We're going to show you tonight some models of exposure of the brain, experimental evidence of DNA and other damage, and human studies that show harm. That's the overall structure of what I'm going to talk about. Lloyd is going to share with you a more detailed analysis of the brain cancer data. I'm going to talk about the others. Other disconnects here. Most people don't realize that the government of France has passed laws making it illegal to sell a cell phone to a young child. And that in France, all cell phones have to be sold with headsets. Few people are aware of this. There are fine print warnings. What does it mean when people put warnings in print that you can't read? Industry here has fostered confusion. And because of this confusion, we have the unprecedented use of this largely untested technology. This is the electromagnetic spectrum, and you see it goes all the way here from the low levels of electricity that allows us to turn on our lights and keep our refrigerators cold, all the way up to the cell phone spectrum, which is quite close to that of radar and microwaves. And that's kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz. That's what those initials are there. And very few people realize that cell phones really are microwave radiation, which is a lower form of radar. And it's a two-way microwave radio, meaning that it both sends and transmits radiation. Radiation that moves at the speed of light, that can't be seen, and that doesn't necessarily have an immediate physical effect. But I'm going to talk to you about some of the effects that we know this radiation does have. The first radar range was huge. It was about this big. It weighed over 700 pounds. It had its own water cooling system. And it cost about as much as 2 cars. And they weren't very popular because, in fact, when you put food in them, they were used for institutions like the military, the food didn't cook very evenly. The next slide shows you that the early microwave ovens were rechristened from radar range to microwave ovens. People didn't like the idea of cooking their food with radar. I really think this is an interesting example of the feminine mystique. You see, radar ranges were invented by men who loved radar. And in fact, there's a real story. I interviewed guys who told me the following. During World War II, sailors would stand in front of the radar on the ships to warm themselves, and someone figured out that if they did it long enough, they got sterile. They'd then go on shore leave and promise the young women they were romancing that they wouldn't get them pregnant. It actually does create sterility to stand in front of radar. Whether or not it comes back, I don't think those young men were particularly concerned about it. But the reality is, new studies today do show you that young men who use their cell phones for 4 hours a day have half the sperm count of others. The microwave ovens, today's ovens, are in fact very different. They use power that is about 1,000 watts of power at 2.4 to 1.9 gigahertz. They can boil a cup of water in 2 minutes. Compared to phones, phones are basically two-way microwave radios. They operate at the same wavelength as a microwave oven, but on less than 1 watt of power. So think about this. The same wavelength as a microwave oven is in a cell phone. Power is over 1,000 times less. You can boil water with a microwave oven in a short period of time. What does long-term holding of that two-way microwave oven do to your brain, do to your body when it's on your body? The progress of cell phones is really hard to imagine. The first phones were called portable, but they were really more like luggable. They came with a... Anybody remember the old phones? You know, the heavy suitcase you had to carry like this, you know? But they could move. Phones today are smaller, faster, lighter. They use less power, but they use a pulsed digital signal. It's the pulsed digital signal that may be the problem. This is a demonstration from research done for industry that shows the absorption into the brain of cell phone radiation. And you can see here on the far left, your left, A, that's the big guy brain, and on the other side, a smaller brain, and not surprisingly, the smaller the head, the greater the absorption into the brain. It's very, very logical. This model here on your left is the big guy called Standard Anthropomorphic Man. We call him Sam for short. Sam has a head that is about 11 pounds in weight, and Sam stands a little more than 6 feet tall and weighs 210 pounds. Kind of a big guy. That model is the standard for which all of the phones everybody in the world uses today was set. This big guy brain, talking for 6 minutes or perhaps a half hour. That's the standards for your phone that you use now. And many of you, perhaps not in this audience, but many people around the world are using phones for hours a day. On the right, you see the head of a child. And a child's brain absorbs more radiation because the skull is thinner. It contains more fluid. Standards have never been set for our children, and yet this is the fastest growing market. Half of all 10-year-olds had cell phones a year ago. Half of all 10-year-olds. The good news is that most children are texting. The bad news is that many of them have no idea nor do their parents, that cell phone radiation gets absorbed much more deeply into younger heads. This exquisite double helix is what is the center of every living cell in our body. Whether our eggs, our sperm, our bodies contain basic DNA that can be found in everything that's alive. When cell phone radiation is exposed to DNA, it doesn't damage DNA by breaking the ionic bonds that hold together the DNA. And that has been thought for years by physicists, like one writing in Scientific American just this week. It has been thought it's physically impossible for cell phone radiation to damage DNA. Well, it is physically impossible for cell phone radiation to break the ionic bond of DNA. But the damage occurs in other ways. This is showing you an example of that other type of damage. This is a comet assay. It's a measure of the unraveling of the tail of DNA, so to speak. It's called a comet assay because when the DNA gets damaged, you start to see tails like you see on the top right and bottom. Those tails are signs of fragmented DNA. That's not a good thing. And you can see that X-rays, gamma radiation there, or radio frequency radiation from a cell phone on the bottom can cause DNA damage. This finding has been replicated at more than 12 different institutions around the world today. This is another finding that's quite disturbing. This is showing that the blood-brain barrier can be weakened and broached by cell phone radiation. We need to protect our brains. That's why we have something called the blood-brain barrier. It keeps poisons out of the brain. This is showing you that that barrier gets breached by cell phone radiation. The next information I'm going to share with you comes from Willem Moskeller, a colleague of mine at the University of Vienna. And he's done extensive research on cell phone radiation. I'm just going to show you one example. He's taken people and exposed them to cell phone radiation. Now, you may know people who are exquisitely sensitive to radiation. Most people don't believe this occurs. Moskeller has shown that it does. What he has done is to create this apparatus where a person sits in this system and they do not know whether or not the cell phone is on or not. It's a double-blinded exposure. They don't know it, and the person observing their response doesn't know it. The results of this work have been stunning. Cell phone radiation makes you faster. It increases alpha waves in the brain. You get much faster response, but you make more mistakes. That doesn't seem like a good thing. He's shown this consistently in a number of different studies. Other work has been done by researchers at more than 7 different institutions around the world. And what they have shown is that the heaviest cell phone users have the lowest sperm count. 4 hours a day use of cell phones, those men have half the sperm count of those who did not use cell phones at all. And in this study at the Cleveland Clinic, 20% of young men were using their cell phone for 4 hours a day. And using the phone for 4 hours a day, not just talking, but keeping it in your pocket, is the problem. That's why the fine print warnings are now saying, do not keep the phone in your pocket. It actually says this. Or you can exceed the FCC exposure guidelines. I think we're going to see a new fashion emerging for men, because where else is a man supposed to put his phone? These are data developed from Australia's National Research Centre on Excellence in Andrology and Biotechnology. That's the study of what makes males male. They've taken samples of sperm from healthy men and split them in 2. Sperm naturally will die. That's what they do. But in this study, what they found is the following. If you expose the sperm to cell phone radiation, seen in the top, you can reduce the sperm, you can make them die faster, like 3 times as fast, and they get sicker from cell phone radiation. The bottom slide shows you the amount of damaged protein in the sperm, and you can see that there's 3 to 4 times more damage produced in the bottom by cell phone radiation. This is also showing you the amount of sperm and a measure of vitality, how well they swim, is affected by exposure to cell phone radiation. And these studies have been done at many different laboratories around the world. And this is not just one study, but many studies, all showing effects of cell phone radiation on sperm health. Parotid gland tumors are a tumor right here in the salivary gland. One of the Beastie Boys has a salivary gland tumor. He canceled the tour last year because of it. We've been in touch with them. He may be starting to speak out about his concern about cell phones associated with it. The parotid gland seen here is exactly where your cell phone sits, right there. Right there. And in Israel, the Israeli Dental Association has issued a warning because 1 in 5 malignant tumors of the parotid gland is occurring in someone under the age of 20. And the rates of this very rare cancer have reported to have tripled very recently. For this reason, the Israeli Dental Association has issued a warning. Clinical case reports can sometimes be very valuable. And in this case, I want to share with you a report that I am getting now from physicians around this country. Young women think it's cool and sexy to keep their cell phones in their bra. These physicians have told me about young women who have developed breast tumors at the site where they keep their phone in their bra. This is a picture from Toss Robinson of a young woman in Guatemala. This is a problem that we need to make sure young women understand. The cell phone manufacturers warn you not to keep the phone on the body in fine print warnings. But in fact, nearly 90% of adults today are using cell phones more than 8 times more than in 1990. Keep that number in mind. Recognize how recent it is. The backstory. Science has become a form of public relations. Doubt creation becomes its own industry. The University of Vienna was one of the major institutions doing studies on DNA damage in cell phones. And suddenly in the year 2004, headlines appeared. Fraud committed at University of Vienna DNA studies on cell phone radiation. Those headlines went around the world. What has not gone around the world is the real story, which is that the fraud was a fraud. That several different groups have investigated the charge of fraud and exonerated the investigators. That has not made headlines, and it won't make headlines unless someone here helps me to get that story out. That story is in my book, about how the Vienna investigators were charged with fraud and how the whole thing was really based on a false premise. That's what's going on in this field routinely. This is what you can find today on the websites of the FCC, the FDA, and the American Cancer Society. There's a kind of schizoid quality. It tells you if you're concerned about radiation, you can use a headset or an earpiece. You can avoid continually wearing a wireless earpiece. You can keep devices off of your body. You can consider texting rather than talking. You can even limit your talk time. On all of them, it used to say you could purchase a low SAR phone, specific absorption rate. But now the FCC took that warning off of its site for reasons that we can talk about later. If you want to protect your family, follow the simple directions that are available to you on this card, and I hope take as many of these cards as you can give away, right? Please, recycle them, spread them around. We want people to know there are simple things they can do to protect themselves. I'm not opposed to cell phones, although I think some of our uses are pretty frivolous. And I am utterly opposed to downloading white noise apps so that you can put your phone under the baby's pillow to get the baby to go to sleep. And no, I'm not making it up. In France, they have a major campaign underway to discourage people from buying cell phones for children. Le portable avant 12 ans, c'est no. Portable phones before the age of 12 is no. And France has passed a law on this. The French government's restriction bans advertising And it requires all handsets must be sold with phones. You cannot buy a phone without a handset. You cannot. And you cannot market or design a phone for children under the age of 6. President Bush's cancer panel issued a stunning report that very few people ever heard about. And that report said the true burden of the environment and cancer has to be determined, and cell phone radiation needs to be monitored, as does the use of other wireless devices. The President's Cancer Panel warned about the need for research on this question. You didn't hear about that one either, did you? The National Academy of Sciences issued a report also saying, we need research. We have data gaps. We don't know about antennas. Do you know where your antenna is in your cell phone? They're usually on the back. And there are about 4 of them on the average phone now. There's a data antenna. There's a voice antenna. There's an antenna for the GPS. There's an antenna for Bluetooth. And yet you don't know where any of them is. That's one of the problems the National Academy of Sciences said needed to be addressed, along with laboratory studies and better models of exposure. Some of this research is research we're starting now at Environmental Health Trust. Our small little nonprofit actually has scientific research underway. Well, you might wonder what this has to do with it all, but how many of you saw the movie, Thank You for Smoking? It's actually a wonderful movie and a great book. The last scene of the movie I want to explain to you in a moment. The movie is about a guy with a tough job. He has to convince people to buy cigarettes. So for moral support, he meets once a week with his 2 friends, one of whom sells alcohol and the other of whom sells guns. And they call themselves the Mod Squad. Mod for Merchants of Death. And they get together once a week and compare notes on their different problems. And at the very end of the movie, there's a new recruit to the scene. The new recruits are guys in suits, kind of uncomfortable, and off camera you hear the voice saying, well, is it true? Do they cause cancer? And then the scene is, well, we don't know, we're not sure. And then the guy says, gentlemen, I want you to practice these words in front of the mirror. Although we are constantly exploring the subject, currently there is no direct evidence linking cell phone use to brain cancer. And that absence of direct evidence has been a theme of industry for years. Instead of following their own warnings about what to do with children or following what others have done, we are pushing cell phones on little children. Industry response to the concerns when they get raised by the public is to call for research. After all, who could be opposed to research? I'm not. I'd like to support my students and young colleagues. But in fact, industry said there were 10,000 studies in 1993 that showed that cell phones were safe. That wasn't true then. In fact, there's only 1,000 relevant studies right now on cell phone safety, and almost none of them has been done in the United States of America. Calling for research becomes an excuse not to act. The fine print warnings, this is showing you a scale of my book. You can see the type size. This is what it really says for the iPhone 4. When using iPhone near your body for voice calls or for wireless data, keep iPhone at least 15 millimeters away from the body. iPhone's measurement may exceed the FCC exposure guidelines if positioned less than 5/8 of an inch from the body, i.e., when carrying the iPhone in your pocket. Interesting, eh? The CTIA, which just completed its meeting here in town, opposes the San Francisco ordinance requiring a right to know. They say people will be confused if you tell them that cell phones emit radiation. Asked in March, why do you have the fine print warnings then? An executive of the CTIA said, we'll get back to you. 6 months later, we're still waiting for the answer. This is what the Secretary of Transportation recently proposed, warning labels on cell phones because of the very serious problem of texting while driving. And we all know the horror stories of what's happened. I think cell phones need warning. They need warnings, not just for texting, but as well for radiation. I think people have a right to know that a cell phone is a two-way microwave radio, that cell phones have been linked in real human males with fertility problems, that cell phones have been linked to a host of other problems that Lloyd Morgan is going to tell you about in a moment. The campaign for safer phones is what we have started, and this involves a business campaign for safer phones. We're not opposed to business. We're just opposed to lying. It involves a grandparents' campaign as well, so that children get safer toys, and if they have cell phones, learn how to use them safely, which is to say texting with a headset and for emergencies, not as routine devices. We also have advice, which you can find on these cards, about how to use your phone. And frankly, you can do something really radical and survive if you turn it off sometimes. Sometimes people ask me, why are we working on this? It's impossible. You know, the job is really complicated. Nobody understands this. If you tell people that phones are more like cars and guns and alcohol, in that they can kill people, but you can use them safely, people say, well, wait a minute, we can't quite get that. But the reality is, it is a complicated job. We've got to deal with the complexity of the science. I continue to believe the American public is capable of handling the complexity of this issue. And so I close with this statement from the Talmud. A group of workers are told to do a job, and they say, we can't do it. We don't have the right tools. It's impossible. It's too big. And the answer is, it's really not up to you to finish the job, but you must begin it. And so I want to thank Lloyd Morgan and Ellie for being my partners in this effort to see that we try to save the brains and bodies and future generation of the world. I'm not telling you to stop using your phones, but I think you have to use them in a smarter way. And I think people have a right to know, they have a fundamental right to know about the dangers of cell phone radiation and the disconnect we face in the way the public uses these devices today. Thank you so much.